this: let me say to anyone to whom we have made commitments and who is currently in Afghanistan, we are working urgently with our friends in the region to secure safe passage. And as soon as routes are available, we will do everything possible to help you reach safety. That's the words of the Prime Minister that were repeated here. And in fact, when this particular statement was repeated in your Lordship's House, we were then told also that this plan had been in existence for most of that year and that it had been reviewed in January and was repeatedly reviewed in order that the chaos that we saw at the Kabul airport would not happen, but it did. My Lords, you would have thought, with all of that planning behind, all of that information, with the fact that we had recruited the triples, that we had trained them, and that we paid them out of the embassy in Kabul, you would have thought that the 2,000 people who made them up, who were the most at risk, who had been working for us in harm's way, known about, recorded and evacuated, and it would be the simplest thing in the world to triage anybody who claimed to be of that group out of the process of Arab. But that's not how it turned out. Instead, a great many were left behind, and so the disastrous evacuation plan of 2021 continues. My Lords, the government created this problem that has caused at least 9 of those who fought for us to be executed by the Taliban, because promised safe passage never appeared. Her Majesty's government told us even last week that there would be no concession in respect of those people who had come here because they were frightened of their lives and were entitled to be frightened of their lives and to find a way of getting here if there was no safe passage. So why no concession for so long? I'm asked this question every day. Every day since I started debating this issue, I'm asked by many people, including many Conservative politicians, why no concession? Why have they not been able to work something out with you, they say to me. Why the delay? Either they have no confidence in their ability to implement this plan and are seeking in some way to delay it that's not their responsibility, or they just want the theatre of delay to their flagship bill to blame Labour, the Lords, the courts and so on. Today, you finally bring a concession, having offered and then withdrawn it last week. They refuse to put it in the face of the bill. And I break away now because, my Lords, I'm going to ask the Noble Lord the Minister if he will either reread the passage of his speech that I call a concession. I know he doesn't, but that I call a concession, and he will read it a bit more slowly to your Lordship's House so that you can understand what the implications of it are. If not, if he has a printed copy, I'll read it slowly. I invite him to read it again, please. Would you do it now? Because it's important to the rest of my speech.
I will. With the leave of the House, I will read it very slowly. That means that once this review of Arab decisions for those with credible links to Afghan specialist units has concluded, the government will not remove to Rwanda those who received a positive eligibility decision as a result of this review, where they are already in the UK as of today.
Already in the UK. Well, you cannot be removed and deported to Rwanda unless you are here by what the government call illegal means, but what I call irregular means. So, my Lords, those words are important for this reason. The Noble Lord, the Minister, does not believe this to be a concession. It is to him a restatement of what he has been telling us for some time, but in a different form. It is, my Lords, quite clearly, in my view, a concession, although I guarantee you now that the media out there are being briefed that it's not, because there can be no concessions with this bill. But let me tell you why it's a concession. In the report stage of the debates in your Lordship's House on this bill, on the 4th of March, at column 1421, I asked this question of the Noble Lord the Minister. Will the Minister answer the question I asked in February when this review was announced, meaning the Triples review of eligibility to Iraq? Will anyone who is eligible but was told they were ineligible and acted in a way in which a small number of them did in extremis to protect themselves from possible death be disqualified from being allowed to become eligible on review? Will they be excluded from the requirement of the Illegal Migration Act and this bill, if it becomes law, that they must be deported to Rwanda? The noble Lord answered for the first time he was in a position to do so. I think he said, I understand they will be deported to Rwanda. Now they will not be. Now that is a concession in anybody's language.
Absolutely.
Until then. And it is an extremely important concession because these are the small number of people that in every speech I have made in support of my amendment, I have said that are the target of my ambition that they will not be deported. So today we finally bring a concession, having offered the name withdrawn. So should I trust them at their word? They left these people behind. They messed up any subsequent evacuation plan. This is the third opportunity competently to do the right thing. Why should I trust them now? I'll tell you, my lords, why I am minded to consider doing so, although I haven't yet made up my mind. Because we, my lords, are now part of a grand coalition, including noble and gallant lords, many very senior politicians and officials who have secured this country for years, who have put their names to this, veterans, campaigners, and so many voters of all persuasions and traditions across our nations, and we will not be silent until today's promise is honoured by this government or the next one. Finally, my lords, what does this ignominious history tell us about the Rwanda policy as a whole? There were no safe routes for those heroes to whom we owe a debt of honour. Still less are there safe routes for any other genuine refugees worthy of the promise of the Refugee Convention, also paid for in courage and strength in an earlier war so many years ago. So while I may not press my motion this evening, I look forward to the day when a Labour government repeals this immoral and unlawful excuse for legislation in total.
Amen.
My Lords, it's a privilege to follow the noble Lord, Lord Brown of Ladyton. His persistence, his clarity and his determination have, in my view, led to a meaningful concession, and it is a concession, by the government on a very important issue. To those who say that your Lordship's House has not behaved in a legitimate and constitutional way in relation to this bill, we can at the very least point to the concession that's been made to the noble Lord, Lord Brown, as justification for still being here debating this bill tonight. I stand principally to speak in favour and in total support of the absolutely admirable speech given by my noble friend Lord Anderson in favour of Amendment A1. I will return briefly to Amendment A1 in a few moments, but before I do, I wish to place on the record something that concerns me very much about the fact that we are debating this matter at all today. And I do so with appreciation for the characteristically gracious and considerate words spoken by the Government Chief Whip. When she spoke earlier this afternoon, I wasn't in the House because I didn't know she was going to say it, but I have been able to watch it on that splendid organ, Parliament Live TV. I speak as a religiously confused person, born with 100% Jewish blood, but brought up in the Church of England by convert parents. I note that there may well be some Jewish peers in the House today. Others I know are absent on the grounds of conviction and conscience. For today is the first day of the Passover festival, of Pesach, one of the Jewish religion's most sacred holidays, a day when Jewish families gather together with their friends sometimes, I should have been at one such event tonight, around a dinner table to pray, to eat, to sing, and to retell the story of the Exodus, with the help of a narrative liturgy called the Haggadah. For those who have been to such an event, to such a Seder, it is a joyful experience and brings home to one the importance of the first day of Passover. I am told that strong representations were made, not least by the Labour Party, through the usual channels to avoid the final stages of the Safety of Rwanda Bill being heard today. The Jewish community, although it places great importance on the first and indeed the second days of Pesach, would have been willing to be here tomorrow or any other day this week. And unfortunately, that was refused. I've tried very hard to think of a legitimate reason for that refusal. If this debate had taken place on Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday or Friday or next week, it would not have made any material difference to the government's position. And nothing that was said by the Prime Minister, who on the 11th of November displayed properly and rightly his devotion to his own religion in public, has justified choosing today for this debate. And I take it as an offence to our ambitions for diversity in this country. Sermon over. I now turn to the government's inexplicable, in my view, refusal to accept Lord Hope's amendments and what are now my noble friend Lord Anderson's amendments. All they would require was for a very small piece of verification to take place in Parliament. A piece of verification that either Rwanda is a safe country or that it's not a safe country. And surely it is right that if there is to be the kind of fiction spoken of very eloquently by my noble friend, there should be that verification in Parliament. At the moment, even if the Secretary of State became aware that Rwanda is non-compliant, the bill as it stands would mean that it would still be deemed compliant. Is there anybody in this House who doesn't honestly think that that is nonsense? And then we have the rhetoric that has been behind this. Even this morning, the Prime Minister talked about stopping the boats and claimed that the worldwide publicity that this bill has received has resulted in stopping the boats. Well, he's not been reading the same newspapers and watching the same websites as me, I'm afraid, my lords. In the last 2.5 months, the number of people on those boats has increased over the previous year. He chose to give the figures for an earlier period in his extraordinary press conference this morning. And what that adage, "stop the boats," has become is just an idle boast. And I would say to the government, it's time to stop the boasts, because this is not stopping the boats. Then we've discovered in recent days, do you remember, my lords, that picture of then Home Secretary Suella Braverman sitting, watching admiringly, looking admiringly on some quite nice-looking houses which had been built in Rwanda for the refugees to come from the United Kingdom. And now we learn they've been sold, or a lot of them have been sold. My lords, if you tried to book a holiday and the travel agent said to you, it's a beautiful island, but there is no property for you to stay in and we're not sure you can get there, you'd think that travel agent was mad. But that's a fair metaphor for the government's behaviour on this bill. And then there's the question of the aircraft. Well, we heard this morning from the Prime Minister that apparently there is a contract with a carrier And I hope that the noble Lord the Minister, who has treated this House with enormous care and respect on this bill, I really do admire the way he's dealt with it, I hope that he will continue to do so by telling the House some detail as to whether there really is a contract, because I'm afraid, given the fictions that there are around at the basis of this bill, at the root of this bill, I'm not sure that I believe that there is a contract, what sort of company it's with, and whether there are pilots who have declared that they're willing to fly the planes carrying these refugees, because I am far from sure that that is the case. And then, would the Minister take the trouble to get someone to go and explain to the Prime Minister that it is deeply insulting to the jurisdiction that brings so much foreign money into the United Kingdom to describe the European Court of Human Rights as a foreign court? It's not a foreign court. It's an international court. I'm sure that the government somehow or other might be persuaded to get that into their heads, but it really is causing enormous difficulty for those of us who try to defend our jurisdiction to hear ministers telling that untruth too. And perhaps the Minister would care to tell us how many times the United Kingdom government has relied on the European Convention on Human Rights in international cases and in cases in this country. When I was a part-time judge, I used to sit in the administrative court, a great privilege for any part-time judge. And I'm absolutely certain that the number of times the European Convention was relied upon by government lawyers appearing for their client, the government, is beyond normal counting. And finally, I would ask your lordships just to reflect for a moment upon the cost of this whole bill. We've now had some accurate numbers from the relevant government accounting organisation. We were told in this very chamber that a maximum of 300 people were going to Rwanda at a cost which at that time, a couple of weeks ago, was estimated at something between 550 and 600 million pounds. I commented at the time that we could send them to the Ritz Hotel in Paris for a couple of years and still have some change. I have been corrected, to be honest. I'm not sure how much change there would have been. But it is an enormous sum of money to deal with a very small number of people. And the government has suddenly decided to do something it should have done years ago, which is to appoint more judges to deal with asylum and immigration cases, to have more civil servants who are specialised in dealing with these cases and dealing with the problem that they have brought upon themselves. So I am very disappointed that by the end of tonight, this bill will pass. I think it's an awful bill. I think it's the worst bill I've seen in my 38 years in one or other House of Parliament. But I will certainly vote in favour of Amendment A1.
I just wanted to say a few words after that bravura performance from the noble Lord Anderson of Ipswich and noble Lord Carlisle. Very good. I take a slightly different view, and I think before we get into the detail, we need to remember the purpose behind the bill. The purpose behind the bill as seen across the country. The bill is designed to stop the boats. And the noble Lord Carlisle just pointed out that, in fact, at the moment, the number of people crossing on the boats is increasing. Well, that is probably because they realise that if this is stopped up, they better get here before the... Secondly, the second thing we need to remember is that in doing that, we are seeking to stop people drowning, dying in the Channel. Thirdly, we are trying to break the economic model of the people smugglers. And fourthly, and most importantly, we are trying to ensure that people do not jump the queue, either because they are coming from countries which are safe, or because they are economic migrants and they are not themselves in any way asylum seekers or refugees. Now, whether the bill will meet its objectives, of course I don't know. Of course I don't know. It may well be that "I told you so" will be a very frequent refrain a year from now. But I do know two things. The first is that it cannot make the situation worse. People will not go down to the beaches in Calais to come here because we passed this bill. And secondly, at present, it is the only game in town. So when we turn to the amendments of the noble Lord Addison, of course, he has very persuasive arguments, honeyed words, which we have heard, and I've heard him many times, congratulated on them on Radio 4 and other times, that this is going to be a small amendment, doesn't really make a difference. And I entirely accept what he says. But, my lords, I think anybody who's going to vote for this tonight does need to think in their heart whether they're really seeking to improve the bill, or whether what they're really seeking to do is to impede it, but not wreck it. They want to impede it, but not wreck it. They are engaged in what I might describe as a game of dragon's teeth. The House will recall that the mythological tale of Cadman, the foundation of Thebes, killed the dragon and planted the teeth in the ground. And they had the fortunate aspect of springing up into fully fledged warriors, and each time they were struck down, more warriors came up in their place. And that sometimes, my lords, when I hear speeches round your lordship's house, behind all the obvious belief that comes, I think, hang on, behind this is actually not a wish to let this bill through at all. We don't like the bill, but we don't want to be put in a position where we are going to kill it. And it is particularly revolved around the issue of the judgment of whether of the Supreme Court, or whether Rwanda is a safe country. And safe, of course, as a word, my lords, is a big word, and particularly a big word with the weight that is being placed on it in this regard. It is, of course, entirely true, my lords, in very few cases are we entirely safe. So I find myself wondering whether the judgment is the right word, or whether what the Supreme Court undertook was a risk assessment, which is a different case, a different category, a different approach. And members of your Lordship's House will probably be aware of the concept of assessor bias. That is, we are much more ready to put low risks onto aspects of problems with which we're familiar compared to those where we are unfamiliar. And so in that sense, my lords, what we're doing here is maybe because we have a situation where we are familiar with the government and legal systems of, say, France or Germany or Western Europe, and not with an African country, maybe some additional risk has been placed, and we need to consider that very carefully. Let it be clear, my lords, I'm not in any way impugning the good faith of the Supreme Court. But what I'm saying in that their risk assessment needs to be weighed and balanced against the other assessments and indeed the undertakings being given by my noble friend on the front bench, for which, by the way, the government will be held responsible by Parliament, and also third-party assessments such as the Ibrahim Index of African Governments, which rates Rwanda 12th out of 54 African countries, and I have said in past speeches, other third-party assessments, third-party risk assessments, which give confidence to my support for this bill. So, my lords, my last thought, my last question then, is for His Majesty's loyal opposition. And we have heard from the noble Lord Brian of Addison that he's looking forward to some commitments for them if they were to form the next government. I've said to some of the lords that when I'm sitting here in a long, perhaps rather tedious committee stage, I think what great stars of stage or screen would be best portrayed by the great men and women who cover our front benches. And the noble Lord Coker is, for me, Harrison Ford, slashing his way through parliamentary undergrowth, and very effective too. But it can't disguise the lacuna at the centre of the opposition's position. Of course now, with the polling, they will clearly be expecting.
With it, Order. I'm so grateful to the noble lord for momentarily giving way. I think I speak for most of us on this side that we understand that his comments are sincere and in no way a filibuster. But would he consider whether now casting everyone in their Hollywood guises is an appropriate use of the House's time this evening, and whether he might just focus on the noble Lord Anderson's amendment, which very briefly and very simply just requires the Secretary of State to lay before Parliament a report from a treaty and a monitoring committee of his own making. That is the amendment that I believe the noble lord is addressing, and does addressing that really require the honeyed words and technicolor that we're currently listening to.
Well, my lords, I'm sorry if I wasn't clear, but I think I have spent some time discussing the issue of risk assessment and the way that the risk is being weighed by various parties and various people and various bodies. And this is the point that the noble Lord Anderson has arrived at, is his assessment of where we are on the risk profile. And I have said that I fully accept his position as being entirely genuine. Now, as far as the last point, we are now standing on the edge of a period of possible political change. I'm sure the party obviously is hoping they'll be here next year, we'll be over there. And it is not unfair, my lords, in those senses, for us to ask the opposition whether tonight, as we come to this very critical point, the point that everyone agrees is critical, the noble Lord Coker can tell us whether, if this bill works, whether they intend, and they were to form the next government, they would continue to use this bill, or they would scrap it. If they would scrap it, the country is entitled to know. If they would continue to use it, then let's stop the dragon's teeth, let's stop playing games, and let's get on, pass this bill into law, and make sure that what happens, happens.
My Lords, I will dwell on the amendments before us, and I well love to stray into the almost second reading speeches like we heard about the state of the bill as a whole. I think the issue here before us are the very specific amendments that have been put down. And I want to say something about what the House of Commons has been doing. And other people have been calling this House the responsible body for making it delay. The delay is not caused by this House. We could have been dealing here on other days earlier than this. It is at the choosing of the government in the other House how this bill plays through this House. And therefore, I think we cannot be accused of not doing our job properly, because that's what we are doing. And it's been the government who's been slowing down the business in the Commons for whatever reasons they feel are acceptable to them. And this House is doing the proper job. Certainly we are with these amendments before us today, because the reasons we are debating for pressing these very important safeguards on this House and on this Parliament are so important. We are asked to declare, as it is in the Act which we're debating, we are asked to declare that Rwanda is safe for refugees and for asylum seekers. Yet when asked whether the policy on refoulement, the most principal policy which was pointed out by the Supreme Court, we asked when the policy on refoulement is to be put in place, and the government could not give any answer at all. So I ask the government tonight, what assurances has the government give that this policy on refoulement and the appropriate training and systems to support will be in place in the next 10 to 12 weeks? And 10 to 12 weeks is important given the statement of the Prime Minister this morning. And second protection, of course, of the amendment by the noble Lord Anderson, of course, is for the future. The future, which is, as this bill stands, binds a Secretary of State in perpetuity. I now turn very briefly to the Lord Brown's amendment, and I listened very carefully to the repetition which he asked us to do. And it seemed to me that there was one very specific group of people who will not be subject to the concession as called by Lord Brown will work for them. And that is for people who have a justifiable claim who are at this moment outside of the United Kingdom. That is a very specific group of people, some of them who are in Pakistan, who are threatened with being sent back to Afghanistan based upon an experience of the bill of a similar sort that we are debating tonight. And my belief, and I hope the belief of this House, and certainly the belief of these benches, is that those people who are allies must have a record somewhere. There must be a record if they were an ally of ours. Somewhere they were employed either by the British forces, somewhere they were being paid for out of British funds, somewhere they would be on a company record for who supplied those services to the services of the United Kingdom's forces. So it is the government who will know who these people are, and they will know when an application comes before them whether there is a prospect of success for them. And what I did not hear tonight, and this House did not hear tonight, was a copper-bottom guarantee that those people seeking applications to come here from outside the United Kingdom will not be sent to Rwanda either. And that guarantee was not given, and I do hope that the noble Lord Brown will reflect on that matter when he comes to put this matter or discuss this matter at the conclusion of this debate. In conclusion, my lords, it seems to us on these benches that despite what we feel about this bill, and I echo many of in fact all of the criticisms made by the noble Lord Carlisle, because we made them. We made them right at the beginning of the bill, at the appropriate time. But now is the time for seeking amendments which actually safeguard critical groups of people and, most importantly, the critical role that this Parliament plays, and we're being asked to make a judgment, and the motion by the Lord Anderson helps this Parliament makes a brave and right choice to be able to tell the truth about matters rather than leaving it to fiction.
Yeah. My Lords, can I start by saying to Lord Hodgson straight away that he asked me what we would do if we win the next election, and I emphasise if we win the next election, we will repeal the bill. We've been quite clear about that, but that's not what we're debating here this evening. We're debating the bill that we have before us, and in particular the two amendments that A1 and B1. But I wanted to just start by because I think it's important that we dispel some of the myths around the debate that has taken place today, started by the Prime Minister this morning in his press conference, who seemed to imply that the debate in this chamber is between those who want to stop the boats and those who don't. Whereas I've made the case continually, as every member across this chamber has done, but we all agree that we need to stop the boats. The dispute in this place is to exactly the right way to go about that and the way to do that. And that's the important distinction that lies between us. We believe that the bill as it stands is inconsistent with the principles and traditions of our country, and as such that's why we oppose it, and various arguments have been made. The argument has never been about, never have I stood at this dispatch box and at any time said to the noble Lord Sharp or Lord Stewart, or indeed to the Government Chief Whip, or indeed the Leader of the House, that we will block the bill. That has never been the policy of His Majesty's opposition, never been something that we have said from this dispatch box. And indeed we voted against a motion that was put before it some weeks ago to do that. But what we've also said is that we will stand up for the proper position of this House, the proper role of this chamber, to argue, to debate, to revise, to suggest amendments, and to put forward that case. And I would just say to the noble Lord Sharp, I hope he's in a position in a few months' time where he stood here doing exactly the same as I am, being as frustrating, as challenging as I'm trying to be to him, because that's the proper role of the House of Lords. And therefore it's important that we do that. And it has been made, I can't remember which noble lord, if the government was as worried about delay as they say they would, why on earth didn't they sort all this out before Easter, when all their own side was whipped to be here on a Monday after we debated on the Wednesday, only to have a further email go out to say that is no longer the case and you will no longer be required. That's how much of an emergency legislation it was. The government could have cleared this before Easter, and yet they didn't, presumably because the Prime Minister couldn't guarantee that everything was in order for the bill to work. So let's not talk about this House of Lords delaying the legislation. Let's look at the government's timetabling of its own business and its inability to actually get that right. And even today, the government, in a press conference to the lobby, as I understand it, couldn't give any detail of the numbers it expects to be subject to the provisions of this treaty, the numbers of flights they expect, or indeed the exact date when it will take place. Never either has it been an argument about the questioning about the integrity of this chamber. I do not believe there is a single member of this Parliament, whether it's in the other place or in this chamber, or indeed of any of the journalists who report our proceedings, who have not got proper integrity. And I would not have gone on the radio, as a government minister did this morning, and accused this House of bordering on racism with the way that it debated the Rwanda treaty. That is a shocking, appalling comment to make. I don't believe that's what Lord Sharp says. I don't think anybody in here has actually been bordering on racism in anything that they've said. I've heard detailed argument, detailed positions espoused by many, but nobody in here, or indeed I believe any other place, or anybody who reports on these proceedings has been anywhere near racist or racism. There is a legitimate difference of view, but we should not resort to those sorts of things being said. I also object, and I do object to this, and the Prime Minister did it again this morning when he suggested that those of us who opposed the Rwanda bill before us lacked compassion, that somehow there wasn't anybody who wasn't opposed to the drownings, who wasn't opposed to some of the appalling things that we see. Of course we're all opposed to that. There isn't a single individual in this chamber, in the press, in the other place, who doesn't abhor some of that which takes place. But that is the context within which we have been debating this. So we're quite right to turn round and say that we are quite right to look at what Lord Anderson is saying, what my noble friend Lord Brown has said. It's not just about Labour peers. Again, the Prime Minister goes on, and we hear other people. Labour is blocking this. Labour peers are blocking. We haven't got a majority in here to block anything. We have to have the support of crossbenchers, Tory peers abstaining or disappearing, the Liberal Democrats voting with us, everybody else. It's not about Labour peers, it's about people, Greens, sorry, Baroness Jones. It's about being at a wedding, you know you're going to miss somebody out. And you go through all the aunts and uncles, all the relatives, and you see the glower of Aunt Mabel from the back. Not that that's you, Baroness. Where have you gone? You're not sitting in your... Thank you. But no, seriously, and the Greens, of course. But look, let me just say this. It's about all of us who believe that the bill is wrong, standing together. And that is why it's important. And if Lord Anderson chooses to put his amendment A1 to the vote, of course we'll support that. And we're pleased to support it because it's a sensible amendment. It doesn't block the bill. It simply says to the government, let the monitoring committee that you yourself have set up say to the Secretary of State, who can then make a statement to Parliament saying Rwanda is safe. But it also gives the government a get-out clause by saying in the future you can actually, just the Secretary of State, presumably on the advice of the monitoring committee, can say that Rwanda is not safe. Whereas in the bill at the moment it's compelled to, whatever happens, to believe it is safe. Perfectly sensible amendment A1. Let me come to my noble friend Lord Brown's amendment. And I do think it's a meaningful concession on the part of the government. I do. And I think that is really important statement to make. And let me say this to all those who are listening. When they question why it's important sometimes that the Lord stands firm, why it's important that sometimes the Lords challenges the government of the day, whatever government there is. Why it says to the government, you've got this wrong and you need to think again. Why tenacious Lords, and in this case, the brilliance of my noble friend Lord Brown in what he's done. The reason is because sometimes the government gives way, and that's what's happened. If we hadn't have pushed this last week, this concession would not have happened. If we'd have given way 2 months ago, this concession wouldn't have happened. So far from this being about the Lords blocking anything or delaying anything, it is the Lords performing its proper constitutional function and bringing about change from the government. And that is what it's about. And it's done in a way, frankly, which actually gets the government itself out of a bind, because we know that many on the government, not only from their own backbenches, but on their front bench, including many in this chamber, they themselves thought what the Prime Minister, one presumes, was saying was wrong. And they needed the Prime Minister to change his position. So the strength of what was proposed in this chamber by my noble friend Lord Brown forced the Prime Minister, and we presume that he supports all of this, forced the Prime Minister to change his mind and to come forward with that concession. And the concession that the noble Lord Sharp is read out is significant, it's important, and is something that my noble friend Lord Brown can be proud of. It may not be everything that everybody would want, but sometimes in politics you have to do what you can and achieve what you can. And in the face of what my noble friend faced, where it was absolute refusal by the government to make any concession at all, the Prime Minister standing in Downing Street and saying he will not change a single word of this bill, has now been proved to be false in the sense that Lord Brown and your lordships have changed the government. Let me just finish with this. The importance of this cannot be understated, because what your lordships have done in forcing the government to rethink, with the support, to be fair, of the front bench, right across the front bench there, means that people who fought with our country, stood shoulder to shoulder with our armed forces, who would have been subject to deportation to Rwanda, will now be exempt from the provisions of that bill. That is a significant change in what the government was saying, and it will mean that some people, either who would have had their rights ignored, or frankly who will be coming to this country in due course through the Arab scheme, would have died, would have not been able to survive. And that is the significance of what Lord Brown has achieved with the support of your lordships. It's your lordship's house at its finest. The government forced to concede in a way that it should have done before, but we should not underestimate the fact that the government has made an important concession, and as such we welcome it.
Well, my lords, as ever, can I thank all noble lords who've contributed to this relatively short debate. I will deal with the points in order of how they were made, and I'll start with the noble Lord Anderson, if I may, and with whom I'm afraid I'm going to have to respectfully disagree. I do not believe we have debased our principles. I believe we've upheld them. We've upheld the principle of the integrity of our sovereign borders, the principle of not ceding our immigration policy to criminal gangs, the principle to safeguard lives and deter, of course, dangerous and illegal channel crossings. That is the point of this bill, has always been the point of this bill, and it deserves to be restated. My lords, going back to my opening remarks, things have progressed since we were last discussing these matters, and I shall repeat them for the record. On the 19th of April, the Rwandan Parliament passed their domestic legislation to implement their new asylum system. The new Rwandan asylum law will strengthen and streamline key aspects of the end-to-end asylum system, in particular decision-making processes and associated appeals processes. I'm very grateful to my noble friend Lord Hodgson for reminding us of Rwanda's high standing in the international league tables. But I think things could not be clearer. There has been significant progress towards many of the things that the noble lord is actually asking for. And that, of course, includes with the monitoring committee, and I'll repeat this too. If the monitoring committee were to raise or escalate any issues to the Joint Committee, where standing members of the Joint Committee are senior officials of the Government of the UK and the Government of Rwanda, with responsibility for areas related to the partnership or areas with a strong interest and relevance in this activity, the government will, of course, listen. And I would remind noble lords that this is up to the Independent Monitoring Committee to raise issues at every point. My lords, the future is not fantasy, as has been alleged. As is well known, the government is satisfied that Rwanda is safe, and we have acknowledged that we can't predict what will happen in the future. But as I also set out, we can assure the House that we have already established the right mechanisms, so should a situation ever arise, the government will respond as necessary. And I repeat, this would include a range of options to respond to the circumstances, including any primary legislation as required. My lords, we don't regard this as the noble and learned Lord Carlisle asserted as inexplicable. We regard this amendment as unnecessary. My lords, turning to the noble Lord Brown's amendment, I'm not going to get into the semantics of what this is or is not. What it actually is the right thing to do. I would say to the noble Lord German, in his remarks, he seems to have missed the entire point of the bill. The simple answer to his question is do not come here illegally. There will be no possible pull factors. There is a safe and legal route available to those in Afghanistan who have served and can prove their eligibility under ARAP, and over 15,000 people have already availed themselves of it. My lords, the noble Lord and learned Lord Carlisle raised the issue of Passover, and I heard what he said very carefully. The start of Passover was considered and very much understood, and we completely understand the noble Lord's concerns, but ultimately scheduling decisions are made with a variety of different factors in mind. But I do hear what he said. My lords, I will also go back to the fact that stopping the boats is not an idle boast. It's actually in the introduction to this very bill. And I repeat for the record, the purpose of this act is to prevent and deter unlawful migration, and in particular migration by unsafe and illegal routes, by enabling the removal of persons to the Republic of Rwanda under provision made by or under the Immigration Acts. The purpose is not an idle boast, it is on the face of the bill. My lords, also as regards refoulement, which again the noble Lord German referred to, no relocated, this is in the treaty, no relocated individual, even if they do not make an application for asylum or humanitarian protection, or whatever the outcome of their applications, shall be removed from Rwanda except to the United Kingdom in accordance with Article 11.1. That's Article 10.3 of the treaty. The treaty, when it is ratified, it needs to be ratified before the bill comes into effect. So I would say to the noble Lord, that is when we will see the provisions being acted upon. So, my lords, as I said earlier, the Commons have considered and rejected these amendments now 4 times. And for the reasons I've set out, they are not necessary. We will only ratify the treaty once we agree with Rwanda that all the necessary implementation is in place for both countries to comply with the obligations under the treaty, including refoulement. We will not relocate people to Rwanda if circumstances change which impact upon the safety of the country. We will not turn our backs on those who supported our armed forces and the UK government. My lords, I would say to the noble Lord Coker, who I'm going to struggle not to think of as the Lord of Indiana Jones from now on, but I hope he is obviously not in his place in a few months' time. I'm not in his place in a few months' time. Couldn't read my own writing, my lords. But I of course respect his right, which he frequently deploys to make my life difficult, and he does. My lord, seriously, illegal migration is costing billions of pounds, and innocent lives are being lost. Bold, novel solutions are required, and our partnership with Rwanda offers just that. Rwanda is a safe country that has proven time and again its ability to offer asylum seekers a safe haven and a chance to build a new life. I beg to move.
Before the noble lord sits down, would he deal with one piece of nitty-gritty? Would he tell us a little bit more about the contract that apparently has reached with an airline?
I would say to the noble and learned Lord, no, I won't. That's about an operational matter. We are discussing the amendments in ping-pong.
I thank all noble lords who have spoken to my motion A1. 2 short points, if I may, in response. First, to the noble Lord Hodgson of Astley Abbots, who knows how much I appreciate the work he does in this House and its committees. A vote for this amendment is not a vote for delay. It simply gives the Secretary of State a power to declare Rwanda safe, having consulted his monitoring committee. He could do that tomorrow if he had the evidence for it. And if he does not have the evidence for it, how can he expect us to do it tonight? Secondly, to the noble Lord the Minister, I thank him for his measured response, not to mention the best laugh of the evening, and for the additional scrap of information concerning the Rwandan law, I assume the asylum law, that he says was passed on Friday. I'm afraid it's the first I've heard of that. I don't know how many of us in the House have had an opportunity to study that law. But he knows that these scraps fall very far short of the comprehensive picture that we would need if we were seriously to make our own judgment that Rwanda is safe, and that the concerns identified by the Supreme Court and by our own International Agreements Committee in great detail only in January have been satisfied. My Lords, in a less frenetic political environment, this common sense amendment, or something very like it, could, I am sure, have been hammered out between sensible people around a table. Sadly, that does not appear to be the world that we are in. I'm afraid I see no alternative to pressing motion A1 and to testing the opinion of the House.
The question is that motion A1 be agreed to, as many of that opinion will say content, or contrary not content. The question will be decided by a division, and I'll advise the House when voting is open. Voting is now open. Clear the bar. The question is that motion A1 be agreed to, as As many as are of that opinion will say content. To the contrary, not content. Not content. The contents will go to the right by the throne, the not contents to the left by the bar. The question is that motion A1 be agreed to. There have voted content 240, not content 211.
Result of speaking in English.
Motion B, Lord Sharp.
I spoke in English. I could understand it.
Lords, I've already spoken to motion B that this House do not insist on its amendment 10F, to which the Commons have disagreed for their reason 10G. I beg to move.
Lord Brown. So I should say the question is that motion B be agreed to. Lord Brown.
Not move. It's a motion. Not move. Not move. We're going to withdraw it.
The question is that motion...
240 peers voting in favour of the Lord's amendment, so against the government, and 211 voting on the government side, so effectively how they would, Rishi Sunak would be hoping them to vote. That means it is going to go back to the House of Commons. We're going to have a few more hours ahead of us.
Well, the likelihood is, I think, that it's probably only one vote in the Commons later. I didn't quite hear what was just said at the end. Are they voting again on another amendment? It's unclear, because we didn't hear what was said by... That was Lord Beetham, the chair, one of the deputy speakers, veteran ex-Lib Dem MP. They clearly are voting on something. I'm not quite sure which amendment they're voting on now. My understanding was Des Brown said, I may not move my amendment, which we all took to mean I won't move my amendment. So this is...
Slightly unclear, as John
Yeah, what they're voting on now.
Are currently, as you say, they're clearly voting on something. That's why they're traipsing.
I hope that one of our Sky colleagues who is listening to this...
We'll try and find out as soon as we can.
Tell us exactly what
This is
they're
what it's like,
voting
the beauty of live TV in Parliament. I love it. But there we go. The main takeaway that we can tell you is that the opposition peers in the House of Lords have won the first run, saying that Rwanda would not be declared safe until a report was completed by the Independent Monitoring Committee. Over to Rishi Sunak. It's going to go back to the House of Commons. That wasn't a surprise, really. We're expecting it to go that way, probably, weren't we?
I've just been told by our colleague that there are no more votes. I think what they're doing now is adjourning for their dinner. I think they're not actually voting. There's a wonderful... The Lords is full of quaint phrases, and one of my favourite ones is adjourned during pleasure, and that means the dinner break.
Excellent.
Can I just tell you, let's just think about those numbers for a moment. 240 to 211. 211 is a low vote for the government. It means a lot of Tory peers have stayed away and not voted. 240, that's fairly typical a vote for the combined opposition parties. But 211 is a low vote for the government. Suggests a lot of Tory peers have not heeded the call to come and vote.
John, thank you very much indeed. Well, as you can see, it's over to the House of Commons. The ping-pong continues. Rishi Sunak, we're told, is absolutely determined to get this bill through Parliament tonight. It's something he staked his premiership on. So in many ways, the Rwanda bill is absolutely critical to the future of the Prime Minister. House of Lords there, sending more amendments back to the House of Commons, and I'm going to go back to you, SJ, for the rest of the news. Thanks.
Thanks, Sophie. No more votes in the Lords for the moment. Back to the Commons. Time for dinner for the House of Lords. Right, let's talk about Keir Starmer, shall we? So Keir Starmer, during a visit to the home of England's football teams ahead of St George's Day, Sir Keir Starmer has promised that he will work to protect the Premier League status as the world's leading football competition, echoing some of its concerns about plans to introduce a football regulator. Well, he was speaking to our sports correspondent, Rob Harris, who's with me now in the studio. So, Rob, a rather wide-ranging interview with Sir Keir Starmer today, and you tried to press him on a lot of issues. What did you get?
Well, he's very cautious. If you think of a football analogy, it's like playing for a team in the lead and just keeping the ball in the corner, trying to ensure nothing goes wrong, of course, as he prepares for the election.
I was going to say, anyone would think it was an election year.
Yeah, and, we've not heard him particularly at depth on sports policy, and it matters so much. Tomorrow, through Parliament, we'll be seeing the progression of the football bill that would lead to the introduction of a regulator. It's something the Premier League are very concerned about. It could impact the game and, in terms, cause damage. For others in the game, they think it could help to sort of ensure the finances are in a better shape, particularly going all the way down the football pyramid. But the Premier League, they think there could be unintended consequences and damage. But for some, they think it's a bit weak in terms of the lack of rigour in the sanctions and the lack of action on foreign state ownership. And it's something that Keir Starmer did not give any sort of concrete opinion on when pressed about the absence of that, particularly given human rights concerns over some foreign owners.
There's a role, obviously, for the Secretary of State under the bill, as it's drafted, it may be amended as we go along, to set the guidance in place. And I think that's the place where we need to look at the detail of it.
But it does talk in the bill about the regulator needing to have regard for...
Involved in crime, 75% of young offenders did not grow up with both parents, and 40% experienced abuse or neglect. Adults are also deeply and detrimentally affected by family breakdown. It's often a gateway to poverty, loneliness, mental ill health problems, and domestic violence from informal partners. Kiernan and Esto's research found women are more likely to be physically abused, assaulted during pregnancy, and seriously injured by live-in boyfriends than by husbands. Professor Jan Walker's research found many wished they had been warned of the harsh realities of post-separation life. There is no information about sources of support on the online divorce system, and emails from it mention neither mediation nor options for help in agreeing child arrangements. So may I ask my noble friend the Minister, could the online divorce process signpost people to such support? Moreover, in this age of graduated smoking bans and online regulation to reduce well-evidenced harms, should we not point people to research-based information about how divorce is rarely the end of a painful process, but the beginning of a new one, especially for their children? Family instability is the social trend of the last half-century, which gets almost no airtime in government. Yet it is a major contributor to our housing and loneliness crises, amongst others. Massive societal harms exacting huge costs on the taxpayer. Matthew Goodwin again calls out the hypocrisy of elites who are, he says, by far the most likely to get married, have children in marriage, and then stay married. Yet they, quote, downplay the importance of stable families, encourage others to lead fluid, individual, and diverse lives, and deride anybody who points to the importance of marriage and family as right-wing reactionaries who want to return to the 1950s. Their do as I say but not as I do is a classic luxury belief, an idea aggressively promoted to bolster their own standing despite the harms and costs entailed, but which they do not personally pursue. Sadly, our own government has undermined the value of commitment in hard times by introducing no-fault divorce to reduce conflict over what was on the divorce petition. However, the reality is this source of conflict pales alongside that over money and children and everything else that has to be negotiated when one household becomes two. The interminable wrangling over such issues fuels the immense backlog of well over 100,000 family court cases and the average 45-week wait for private family law cases involving children, despite the government's target of 26 weeks. Allegedly, in some areas, it's over 60 weeks. All the time, conflict, unhappiness, and eye-watering costs grow. Last year, CAFCAS alone cost almost £150 million. May I ask the Minister the total costs for that year for family courts and the family justice system, as these don't seem to be published? Our family courts are vital, but should be the place of last resort. Before then, every proper assistance should be given to couples, as the Lord Chancellor said during the Divorce, Dissolution and Separation Act. His commitment was that, quote, the government would work harder to bring together the strands of policy that sit with various departments to ensure we have a family policy that is fit for the 2020s. The vehicle for doing that now is the growing number of family hubs in around 100 of 150 local authorities. I should declare my interest as a guarantor of FHN Holding, the not-for-profit owner of the Family Hubs Network Limited. Family Hub networks include and build on Sure Start's vital early years work. They bring together all the family support in an area for parents with older children and those with special needs. The Independent Review of Children's Social Care and the Children's Commissioner emphasised the need for integrated, community-based family support in family hubs. Moreover, historically, Michael Young, Labour architect of the welfare state, knew struggling parents needed support. The Second World War had a long tail of effect on families, particularly the emotional costs of high levels of divorce and separation from parents, trends which have, of course, continued, as I've already outlined. Family centres were legislated for in the 1989 Children Act. Sure Start Children's Centres was the first step, and family hubs are the next iteration. However, much remains to do, extending way beyond the next election for hubs to fulfil their transformational potential. Since 2006, Australian family relationship centres have successfully signposted families away from the courts by providing mediation and focused guidance. A key message from the academic evaluation was that their work would be greatly enhanced by co-locating or integrating help with housing, debt, and other support families need at times of transition. In other words, they would be greatly improved by being part of a family hub network, and our family hubs would be greatly improved if they included an offer akin to that of the Australian family relationship centres. The March budget promised £55 million for family courts, including money to support families through non-court dispute resolution. Ministry of Justice documents on earlier resolution of private family law arrangements prominently feature family hubs. Minimum expectations for all government-funded family hubs by March 2025 require support for reducing parental conflict and information for separating or separated parents. Pioneering local authorities like Rochdale already include evidence-based programs for parenting when separated, and the Family Solutions Group has a pilot-ready model to further enhance such provision. Even in cases which must go before a judge, much could be achieved during pauses between stages by drawing on services in family hubs which help address entrenched relational difficulties such as post-separation parenting programs and support for their children. May I ask the Minister again, will the government fund such pilots and encourage family courts to work closely with hubs? In conclusion, I have highlighted that family breakdown is the elephant in the room of very many social policy problems. Family hubs are well positioned to prevent and mitigate its considerable harms through early intervention and support. We must now build on the good foundations the government has laid in their Family Hubs programme and maximise their potential in this vital area.
My Lords, I would like to congratulate the Noble Lord Farmer on securing this debate, and it's a pleasure to follow him. I've been involved in this area in various guises since my time as Chief Executive of Relate, as a former Chair of CAFCAS, and as Chair of the Lords Select Committee conducting post-legislative scrutiny on the Children and Families Act 2014. And indeed, as I prepared for this debate, I was also reflecting on my time a few years back as chair of the Kids in the Middle Coalition of Children and Families charities and Agony Aunts, which campaign for better support for separating families, and in particular, children caught up in parental conflict. In its day, the coalition had direct access to Prime Ministers and Secretaries of State of various hues. So my starting point in these debates has always been the need to provide more support to children embroiled through no fault of their own in the middle of serious and damaging parental conflict, and the pressing need for a stronger voice for children in the family courts. We know, and we've already heard, that the quality of interparental relationship is a key impact on children's long-term mental health and future life chances. In other words, this all really matters. My Lords, the majority of separating parents come to an agreement on their own or with minimal help from relatives and others. Only a minority need extra help, either to come to an agreement outside of court or through the family courts. But there is a widespread agreement that this process is just not working properly. Far too many parents find themselves caught up in lengthy court proceedings which are costly both to them and to the state, and which have a damaging effect on their children. And at a time when the family courts and the judiciary are suffering from a lack of resources and huge backlogs, and as the government rightly looks to divert family matters away from court where that's safe and possible, I am convinced that early legal advice is critical. Early legal advice helps people understand their legal rights and responsibilities and understand where court is inappropriate. Conversely, a lack of clear information and guidance means opportunities are being missed to resolve arrangements for children earlier. We must move away from a situation where the court is still too often seen as the first port of call to it becoming regarded as the last resort. And respondents to the government's consultation last year on supporting earlier resolution of private family or arrangements pointed to a lack of early information and advice, leading to disputes escalating, with individuals applying to court without a proper understanding of alternative ways to resolve disagreements or of the court process. And this was also the conclusion of the Select Committee reviewing the Children and Families Act. We argued strongly for the need for early legal advice, as many others have. It's far better to help couples make informed choices to find the route that gives them the best chance of reaching constructive and lasting outcomes on key issues such as family finances and the arrangements made for children. This may be a non-court-based approach, sometimes mediation, but sometimes other forms of dispute resolution such as arbitration, collaborative law, solicitor negotiation, or indeed therapeutic mediation. I am also strongly of the view that there should be earlier, easier, and possibly even statutory access to co-parenting programmes before an application to court can be made, unless it's not safe to do so. So whilst a co-parenting programme and a MEAM, a Mediation Information and Assessment meeting, are clearly different, I don't really see why one, i.e. the latter, is compulsory. Only one is compulsory before an application can be made. I was totally persuaded of their value, having sat in on several such separating parents programmes with separating parents present, and pretty much seeing the scales falling from their eyes, along with some tears, as they started to understand the impact their high conflict behaviour was having on their children. Indeed, I always remember one family judge telling me they should be showing on a permanent loop in the entrance to all family courts. So could the Minister please update me on what is happening on both in-court and pre-court parenting programmes? Mediation, of course, can help to divert cases from court, helping parties to reach settlement and limiting the burden on court time. However, in some cases, mediation isn't appropriate. Some couples have genuinely intractable disagreements which do require court intervention to settle. Now, I've always been concerned with the government's sort of single focus on mediation as a way of reducing the backlog. It seems sometimes to the exclusion of all other forms of dispute resolution. Again, my Select Committee, after looking at all the evidence received, was clear that these MEAMs have sometimes been ineffective and had low take-up. We concluded that the single focus on mediation, combined with no requirement for the respondent to attend, coupled sometimes with a perception of MEAMs as a form of relationship counselling, have hampered their success. Instead,